In the 16th century, Florence, Italy, a certain diplomat, Niccolo Machiavelli, wrote one of the most influential yet controversial book in history. It was written as a guidebook for new rulers. It preached for cruelty and tyranny, deception and destruction, and stripped away traditional morals. Some call it evil, others call it a masterpiece of realism. The book has been praised for being honest, feared for its ideology, banned and misunderstood for centuries. The Prince was originally written for Lorenzo Medici, the ruler of Florence during Machiavelli's time. It was a call for a strong and cunning leader to save Italy from internal conflicts and foreign invasions. But whatever it was honest about power and showed how it should be acquired and how it should really be used. And this is what the book teaches: a guide to power. While everyone dreams for a leader who is compassionate and truthful, someone who cares for individual security. But far from that is Machiavelli's ideal prince. Cruel and deceitful, no hesitation in harming his subjects. Putting these two different rulers on a scale of effectiveness, Machiavelli's prince would outweigh the other. Machiavelli derives this notion from his view of human nature. He believes that man by nature is selfish and greedy. Most of the classical political philosophy before Machiavelli held that politics should be guided by ethical principles, but failed to account for the harsh realities of human nature. Classical thinkers like Plato and Aristotle preached for political systems that fostered virtue and common good. They believed that human beings can achieve moral excellence through reason and education. But for Machiavelli, he departs from their beliefs, and he did so because of his observation of the recent and ancient history, even to the times of those thinkers themselves. Men of those times, until his time, repeatedly showed their ill nature. To him, there is such a difference between how people fantasize how people should be versus how people actually act. Machiavelli suggests that politics and statecraft should be approached realistically, prioritizing effectiveness rather than idealistic notion of morality. In his words, if you always want to play the good man in a world where most people are not good, you'll end up badly. If a ruler wants to survive, he'll have to learn to stop being good, at least when the occasion demands. What Machiavelli wants to tell the prince is that instead of trying so hard to keep up good qualities, don't hesitate to pick some bad qualities, but pick only those that would benefit you, those that would help you hold power, and avoid the vices that would destroy you and take your powers away. There are things that seem morally right, but when practiced would lead to the prince's downfall. For Machiavelli, the end of the state is power, and the prince must be willing to do anything to achieve that end. And that is what makes a prince effective, because the end justifies the means. He advises the prince to act immorally if it is to achieve a greater good. This is the core philosophy of his book. So what bad qualities exactly should help you hold power? Here Machiavelli gives a plenty of examples for the prince, some of which are stinginess over generosity, cruelty over compassion, deceitfulness over faithfulness. Although generosity seems like a virtuous trait for a ruler, he is being generous at the cost of imposing special taxes from his subjects. If he keeps it up, he would one day run out of his wealth and his subjects' money. This would make him hated quickly, and worst of all, leave him without money to defend his state. When the prince doesn't mind and stop being generous, people will eventually think of him as generous for not needing to raise taxes. The same goes for cruelty over compassion. However, Machiavelli advises for cruelty well used, rather than being abused. Machiavelli gives the example of Cesare Borgia, who he thinks has most resemblance to the ideal prince from his times. Machiavelli regards Cesare Borgia as more merciful and more compassionate, as compared to the Florentines, whose hesitation to use cruel methods led to public chaos, whereas Cesare Borgia had his governor in Romagna brutally executed and publicly displayed, instilling fear into the hearts of the people, thus securing peace and obedience among the people. Machiavelli's justification of such tyranny is that giving out punishment will harm a few individuals involved, but save many more from a further chaos. Machiavelli then continues with his famous line, "Is it better to be feared or loved? Since one can't choose both, for the prince it would be safer to be feared than loved." A prince may be loved during good times, they would swear their loyalty to him. But when bad times come, they would turn their backs on him. On the other hand, fear is constant. Men are more worried about letting down a feared one than a loved one. Machiavelli concludes with the line, "Gratitude is forgotten the moment it's inconvenient." Fear means fear of punishment, and that's something people never forget. Machiavelli takes two examples from the time of the Punic War. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, was able to unite and command a very multicultural army while staying in foreign soil. Resorting to cruel methods help him keep his army's loyalty. On the other hand, Scipio, the Roman general, was very lenient with his soldiers, which led to disobedience towards him. But upon taking order from the Senate, he restored order, which even helped him gain reputation. However, Machiavelli doesn't advocate for blatant use of cruelty. He suggests that cruelty should be wisely used. Machiavelli gives an example of Agathocles, king of Syracuse. He began his life as an ordinary citizen. He rose through the ranks in the army, and once he wanted to take power and become a king, he summoned an assembly of senate and people. Once he signalled his soldiers, they came in to kill them all. Even with such cruelty, he was able to rule for a long time. Machiavelli credits this to cruelty well used. It is when a prince uses his cruelty drastically at the beginning, and stop when it is enough to secure his position. It is short-lived and decisive. Cruelty is badly used when you're not drastic enough at the beginning, but grow increasingly cruel later on, rather than easing off. A prince must get done with all his violence and cruelty once, and once he stops, the people will be more reassured. If he does not, he will have to get rid of the problem later anyway. At that time, the people will be terrorised with the constant cruelty the prince is handing out. Everyone would appreciate and admire a ruler who keeps his word and is honest rather than someone who goes deceiving and lying all the time. But what difference does that make? Why should a prince bound himself to his words and promises while he can effortlessly deceive anyone, his subjects or his enemy, without them even knowing, and still achieve the same end? As Machiavelli also observes, in our own times, we've had examples of leaders who've done great things without worrying too much about keeping their word. Outwitting opponents with their cunning, these men achieved more than leaders who behaved honestly. There are two ways of doing battle, playing by the law or using force. Humans play by the law and frenzy animals by force. But using your cunning is not always enough to win the battle. A prince must be always ready to resort to violence. Another direct quote from Machiavelli: "If all men were good, this would be bad advice, but since they are a sad lot and won't be keeping their promises to you, you hardly need to keep yours to them." There are many examples of rulers easily breaking promises and violating peace treaties throughout history. A prince may also do it if it is to forward his interest. Machiavelli admires Ferdinand of Aragon for his political shrewdness. He broke faith and treaties when it is to serve his interest. Ferdinand accepted a generous surrender from the Muslim Emirate of Granada in return for the religious freedom and fair treatment of Moors. However, these promises were eroded within a short time, and within a decade, he broke the treaty and expelled the Muslims from Spain. Let's take another example from him. Ferdinand initially agreed with King Louis of France to partition Naples between the two crowns, but when disputes arose, Ferdinand betrayed him and drove the French out of Naples. There are more examples of him making promises that were later withdrawn. In recent history, you can take the example of Operation Barbarossa, prior to the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany. Germany and the Soviet Union had an ambition to take Poland. Taking the advantage, Hitler teamed up with the USSR against Poland. They signed a non-aggression pact with the USSR, promising they would not attack each other for a decade. After the success of the campaign, Hitler waited for a favourable situation. When the time came, he backstabbed and betrayed the pact and launched a full surprise invasion on the USSR. In this regard, it's worth noting that in general, you must either pamper people or destroy them. Harm them just a little and they'll hit back. Harm them seriously and they won't be able to. So if you're going to do people harm, make sure you needn't worry about their reaction. This resonates well with the authoritarian pursuits of many Machiavellian leaders. Joseph Stalin is one infamous ruler with such notorious acts. To rise to power, Stalin conducted the Great Purge. During this time, He targeted not only potential rivals within the Communist Party, but also military leaders, intellectuals, clergy, and ordinary citizens, anyone who could possibly challenge his absolute authority. These purges were not conducted to punish crimes, but to eliminate the possibility of dissent. By arresting, executing, or exiling countless people, Stalin ensured that no cohesive resistance could ever take form. What makes Stalin's method distinctly Machiavellian is not just the scale of harm, but its finality, the destruction of ideologies and willpower. Through terror and psychological manipulation, Stalin struck so thoroughly that his victims were not only physically eliminated, but mentally paralysed, ensuring they could never regroup or pose a threat. A ruler does not need to have virtuous qualities, but it is important that he appears to have those. Machiavelli advises the prince to be a wolf in a sheep's clothing. You can also be virtuous as long as you are mentally prepared to flip your morals when your interests are challenged. In general, people judge more by appearance and final results. Everyone sees what you seem to be, only few will experience who you really are. Napoleon was almost a perfect embodiment of such principles. He cunningly shaped his public image using art as propaganda and controlling the press. One such example is the painting of him visiting the plague-stricken victims of Jaffa. In 1799, during his campaign in the Middle East, his army captured Jaffa. After the siege, his troops massacred thousands of Ottoman prisoners and civilians. Soon after, a plague spread among the soldiers. There was even a rumour that he ordered 50 infected soldiers to be poisoned. So in order to counter the rumours and the perception of him as a tyrant, he commissioned this painting. The painting depicts Napoleon touching a plague victim, while his officer tries to stop him from touching the infected soldier. The scene gave him the image of calm, compassion, and selfless leadership. Even the historicity of the painting is still debated, some claiming he only briefly visited and the details of the painting are exaggerated. Now, with all that mentioned, a ruler must avoid hatred. If he gets hated, the people will add to the prince's burden in times of war, or even worse, revolt and eventually overthrow the prince. A prince must be beware of two kinds of threat, one that is internal and the other external. If a prince has a good army, he need not worry about the external threat. If you are secure from external threats, then you will also be internally secure. All he needs to do is avoid being hated. Like Cesare Borgia, he was cruel and ruthless, yet did not bring unnecessary harm to his people. His cruelty was directed at his enemies, and he took great care to maintain his image as a protector of the public good. Rulers in modern times have levelled up the game with cunning use of propaganda, controlling the press and medias. Let's take Stalin again, for example. He committed one of the most atrocious acts in human history. He sent millions to gulags, orchestrated famines, butchered his own people. Yet the public never revolted against him. He avoided hatred by skillfully crafting a cult of personality. He portrayed himself as the benevolent father of nations, the heroic successor to Lenin, and the protector of socialism. State propaganda, posters, portraits, statues, literature, and speeches tirelessly praised him as wise, modest, and infallible. Films, plays, and songs were made to glorify him. School children were taught to worship him as a hero and wise father. This was a deliberate effort to ensure that even amid fear, the people respected and revered him, not just feared him. The Soviet citizen may have feared Stalin, but many saw him as a necessary force for stability and greatness, not as a villain to be overthrown. To every of his advocacy, he provides an elaborate justification, but are these justifications valid? Some of his advices would be considered downright immoral most of the time, but let us also realise the context and the environment that made Machiavelli write such advices. After all, Machiavelli seemed to be a patriot in the midst of ever-conflicting Italian states. He wanted the prince to execute his ideas in hopes that it would unite the people and end the suffering and lead them to a safer future. But in the end, the person who he wrote this book for, Lorenzo Medici, didn't even read the book.